Hi, everyone. If you've been watching the news this week, you'll see that LinkedIn just announced the release of their hiring agent. So anyone that has a talent contract should potentially be eligible for this. I haven't seen the sales data or the pricing page, and I'm not working within the space itself right now. So what I'm going to do is take a look at the overall high level data and try to understand how that may impact TA capacity planning for the coming year. If you're going through this process right now, which many will be in the coming months, you really want to think about what are the different tools that you can potentially integrate and how is that going to affect your staffing model as you're thinking about the recruiting team you're going to need to fill the goals and all the recs that you're going to be looking for next year. So you can see the launch page here. You can actually pull the information that I've used from this and you can make your own adjustments based on what you believe your implementation is going to look like. The page is really just one of the spreadsheets that I've used in the past. You'll see a link for the template down below. Please just make a copy of this, use it for whatever you need it for, adjust all of the data based on what you need. If you do find this helpful, it would be great to hear in the comments or just reach out to me on LinkedIn. But I'm hoping this will be helpful and really start to generate some discussions around what kind of tools are going to be needed in the coming year so that we can actually start to think about what are the impacts of tools like this. So let's dig into the model. There's 3 steps to the process, should be fairly straightforward. And you should be able to pull most of the data that you need from your applicant tracking system. Or if you don't have historic data, just throw some numbers in there and try and come up with some good estimates. And it'll give you kind of a ballpark figure as to whether something like this hiring assistant is going to be worthwhile for you. So step 1 is funnel assumptions. We're actually going to take a look at the different funnels that we may be using to hire, the activity that's used in those funnels, and then what we think is a reasonable assumption for the changes that are going to be made as part of this new rollout, this new tool. So you'll see here, we have 3 main funnels that we're going to look at. An inbound heavy funnel, which it could be like career sales, it could be a campus recruiting pipeline or something similar. We have an outbound heavy funnel. This could be senior level roles or something that's a little more difficult to hire for, where your recruiter is going to do a lot of sourcing on LinkedIn. And then we have evergreen roles, which these are roles that are kind of being constantly filled, things like customer service roles or maybe warehouse roles where you always have a posting and you're just always cycling people through those. And the new one, this is all calculated. And then we're going to input a few assumptions in here. Just for reference, what I've tried to do is color code all the cells where the yellow cells are data inputs that you'll put in. The green cells are calculated field. And then any key metric that I think is going to be really important is highlighted in purple. Again, this is a calculated field, but I think it's going to be helpful as you start to think through what's going to happen over the long run. So let's jump in. This is actually covered in one of our previous capacity planning sheets. What I will go through is the decrease that I expect to see from a tool like the new LinkedIn hiring assistant. Now, this was taken from the Apple page. LinkedIn shared some data. Now, there's always an overestimate of the actual impact of this. You've got to think about things like, is this going to be adopted by all of the recruiters? What is the effectiveness actually for the roles that we're going to be hiring against? And, is it actually going to affect our inbound channel as much as they maybe say? I haven't seen a lot of the data sheets, so I can't glean anything else from that. So really, I think this is a good way to use your best judgment. In column G here, just think through what is the decrease in actual activity that you're going to expect. Now, really what I should have done is decrease the table here on the left. What I actually did was decrease the activity time in minutes, just assuming that the hiring agent is actually going to help you to accelerate the amount of processes that you get through rather than reduce the number of people that you're actually going to review. I actually think that's a better approach because if you're reviewing the same number of people, but it's taking you much less time, then you're actually not narrowing your top of funnel and you're not hitting metrics that may be important for things like diversity, equity, and inclusion. So what we're doing here is calculating the new activity time for each of these. You can see a 60% decrease means something that took a minute in the past now takes less than half a minute. And you can see how that played out over time. And what this is used for is to calculate the activity time per hire per channel. So you can see here, it used to be 44 hours per hire for the inbound. It's now 27 hours per inbound. Plug in your activity hours per month. And this is just a simple capacity utilization for your recruiters by the amount of time that they're actually going to work in a given month. But on the table below here, these purple metrics are showing you your historic hires per month and then what you might expect it to be with the integration of a new tool like the hiring agent. So your inbound's going from 2.5 hires a month to 4 hires a month per recruiter. Again, you're seeing the same type of increases in your outbound heavy and evergreen roles. And the reason I broke it up into three different pipelines is because we have different activity levels across the different pipelines. The outbound heavy, maybe we're contacting 100 people out of every 1,000 processes reviewed. For Evergreen, maybe it's 200 just to get the funnel metrics down. And you'll see that what I didn't do is assume that there's going to be any improvement in the actual screenings from the hiring manager and the number of interviews. And that's because an AI tool really used to help with top of funnel, where you have a lot of data points and you're trying to really channel it down into a few that you think are going to be top priority. And we're assuming that we're able to do that as effectively, but it's going to take less time. So actually, when we get to the hiring manager, they're going to see the same quality candidates coming through. And so that's not going to affect your bottom of funnel metrics, but it should affect your top of funnel, which is actually where most of the time savings are going to come from. So you'll see that the improvements are here in new hires per month. And what I actually did was estimate for a mid-sized company, one of the annual recs that you're going to want to hire. You can see here is 260 hires per year. Maybe, that's, a 2,000, 3,000 person company. That's maybe replacing 10% of the roles a year. Obviously, if you're growing, that's going to be much higher. And so just plug in an estimate based on the channel for how many hires you expect to make in the coming year. And then what that allows us to do is calculate how many recruiters we're going to need in the old model and in the new model. And you can see here, what I used is this formula that is called ceiling. So what this does is essentially just rounds up so that you always have more than you actually need. And this is because your capacity is really important. If you operate at 100% capacity, you actually have no wiggle room for when something goes wrong. So we'll always keep the capacity a little lower than 100%. This feels about right because we've already baked in some utilization when we're looking at active hours per month. And so you can see that with 12 recruiters in the team, we're actually hiring 24 people per month, or we're at 89% capacity. With only 8 recruiters in the updated process, we're actually hiring 26 people a month. And so we're at 83% capacity. So what this means is that we actually have additional capacity across the recruiting team, which accounts for things like if one of the recruiters leaves and you actually need to replace them. So you've got a time to hire a factor in there. It could account for different processes you might need to do in terms of training and onboarding with new tools. It could actually be more cross-functional work that you want your recruiting team to do, which can be very effective, such as training interviewers or thinking about how you think about the whole onboarding end-to-end process for new hires to increase retention and increase the quality of internship performance. And so I think it's really important to think about this, but you can obviously see instantly that we need 4 fewer recruiters for the coming year than we would have initially expected. And so this could be a big cost saving for the overall business. What I've done at the bottom here then is to actually review those cost savings and say, okay, what is the fully ordered compensation for each recruiter? You can see I've adjusted it by channel. Generally, maybe your more junior recruiters are focused on the inbound channels. Your more senior ones are focused on outbound and sourcing. And then maybe your mid-level recruiters are actually working on those evergreen roles, which don't really change too much. And so you can see the overall headcount cost, just a multiplication, it's going to pretty much 1.2 million, goes down to about 800,000. And so you're saving almost 400,000 with these expected benefits that you're going to get from this new tool, which is over 30% cost saving. And given that on the financial balance sheets, headcount is a very clear cost, that could really have a huge impact to the overall profit margin of the business. So it could be a big opportunity. What I also did at the bottom here is to just add a license cost, just so that you can start to think about, depending on the pricing model that LinkedIn is going to use for this, are the savings actually worthwhile? What is the believability that these savings are actually going to be realized in this coming year? Is it going to take time? What is the payback period? So you can do all of your calculations, and this is going to be helpful for procurement. But overall, you can see based on these assumptions, net savings of 300,000 accounted for a $10,000 per recruiter license cost, which I think is probably very high. Actually, would expect that to be much lower. Using a lot of conservative estimates, it seems like a no-brainer. Obviously, we're going to figure out whether this actually works when we see more companies actually using this kind of technology. Pretty excited by this. Obviously, if we then increase the annual recs by a factor of 10, so maybe for some of the larger organizations that maybe would be more interested in this kind of tool, you can see the overall cost savings go up to 3.4 million, which, for a larger company, that headcount cost can have a huge impact on the overall business. Not to mention that with 40 fewer recruiters needed in this type of organization, there's less need for additional management support and org design and everything else that comes with it. Obviously, you need to start maybe thinking about a more agile recruiting team when you're reducing your overall headcount by 40%, but it is going to be a huge impact to the business. What does this mean? I think you're going to have to start thinking about how you integrate these types of tools, whether any of the tools that you already have in your stack are now superfluous. Like, can you get rid of them and replace them with something that's a little more effective? Maybe cut down the overall stack, which reduces your training burden, overall cost structure. And so you can start to implement this kind of approach moving forward. And then start to think about how do you train your recruiters so that if you have 40 fewer recruiters, they're actually better trained in order to perform these kind of new processes with new AI tools. Maybe as part of that training, they get more technical and you actually have to increase their overall compensation. This 3.4 million maybe goes down if you increase your overall headcount cost by 10% because you want to retain these recruiters that you are training when every other company is now going to start to look for people who are fully trained and have this kind of approach and mental model moving forward. Okay, so I hope that was helpful. Please let me know what you think, what your thought processes are in the comments below. Would love to get some LinkedIn here if you're using this kind of tool. And I think we'll review this in a few months once we actually see some data on how the different companies have been able to implement this. I want to get some feedback from some of the people in the space on whether this is actually as effective as LinkedIn is making us believe. Take care. Bye-bye.